Hello everyone, and welcome to Dutch Greybeard. In this episode of Treasures of Reading, I will wrap up everything I read in the months of May and June of 2025. Like my previous wrap-up, I can say once again that these were extremely good reading months for me. My lowest score for a book was 71 points out of 100, which compares to a 3.5 stars. And the highest score I gave was 92 points out of 100, which I gave to 3 books, no less. And 2 books got 91 points out of 100, which also compares to 4.5 stars. So, yes, no complaints regarding the quality of what I read. In terms of quantity, I'm also content. Despite my busy life during this period, I read 13 books with a total of 4,809 pages. That's an average of 370 pages per book. The smallest was 188 pages short and the biggest was 783 pages long. As usual, fantasy dominated my reading with 10 of the 13 books. 2 I would classify as literary fiction and the remaining one was a non-fiction book. Here's the chart which gives you an overview of all the books I read these 2 months. As always, at the end of this video, I will show you all the books I've read since the beginning of my journey into fantasy, starting in January of 2023. Let's go through all the books in the chronological order in which I read them. In case I already made a reading experience video of a certain book, I will show the link here on the top right and also in the description box below. The Dragonbone Chair by Ted Williams, 783 pages, read between 16 April and 9 May. After Red Rising by Pierce Brown and The First Law by Joe Abercrombie, this was another highly anticipated book that turned out to be a disappointment. Not that it was a bad book, but with 72 points out of 100, I scored this book at least 20 points lower than I had expected. This was a buddy read I did with my good friend B.J. Minton, and I believe he was even more disappointed than I was. If you want to hear me talk in detail about why I was not blown away by this first book in the Memories, Sorrow and Thorn trilogy, please check out my reading experience video. For now, I will say that even though my personal circumstances no doubt contributed to this letdown, the slow pace of the story worked extremely narcotic. I needed 23 days to falter through the almost 800 pages of this book. And BJ must have gnawed away at it for 2 months, if not longer. It is indicative that I put the second book, Stone of Farewell, significantly lower on my TBR. At this point, I still believe I will continue with the series, mainly because of the praise for the final book, To Green Angel Tower. But I'll wait with that until my life has settled down somewhat. Who knows? 2026 may be the year when I give Ted Williams another chance. Cat's Cradle by Kurt Vonnegut, 206 pages, read between 3 and 12 May. This is the third book I read by this author, and it was a good reading experience. This was a buddy read I did with Eric from the channel Gronsky Books. One of the main takeaways for me was the realization of why I hardly read any literary fiction anymore. I have already made a rather personal video on my reading experience, which is going to be a collaboration with Eric. It will be published once Eric has found the time in between his multitude of ongoing projects. For now, I can say that I loved Vonnegut's composition and meticulous prose, which leaves no word unaccounted for. Every detail is painstakingly part of the whole. I also very much enjoyed the cynicism and making fun of religion as a concept. The exposure of the idiocy of how power and war crazy mankind truly is also was to my liking. What I didn't appreciate as much is that typical literary trick of letting the reader search for the meaning of a turn in the story or the dancing around the possible meaning of the title, the exact hide and seek in words that sometimes defines literature. Still, with 79 points out of 100, this is a solid 4-star read for me. I definitely want to read more Vonnegut, but I am in no hurry to do so. Howl's Moving Castle by Diana Wynne Jones, 302 pages, read between 12 and 16 May. I liked this fairy tale-like book, but it would go too far as to say that this was a direct hit. With 74 points out of 100, it's a 3.5 stars, close to 4 stars. It definitely entertained me, although it was weird and surrealistic at the same time. The story was very slow and a bit thin, to be honest. The prose, unfortunately, did not make up for that. About halfway, I got excited again when the story took an almost Piranesi kind of turn, as if the door into a greater story was suddenly thrown open. The book really needed this at this point. Unfortunately, the story sort of went to sleep again after this. At the end of chapter 19, on page 263, I wrote in the margin, "I've lost real interest in this story some time ago. Nothing much is happening." Overall, I found this book to be mainly weird. The author does not explain very much, and it has a strongly surrealistic atmosphere. Characters at times respond strangely or not at all at big happenings. I'm not a fan. Yet. Castle in the Air by Diana Wynne Jones. 285 pages, read between 10 and 18 June. I read a couple of other books before I returned to the Howl trilogy, but I will put this one straight after Howl's Moving Castle. My experience for Castle in the Air was similar to the first book. The fogginess this blurry prose creates surrounded me straight from the start. Wynne Jones's prose somehow invites me to wander off, which, considering my huge personal transition at the moment, happens all the time. Also, the barrier between dream and reality is a little vague. After chapter 3, I got the feeling that the story began to appeal to me. At the end of chapter 10, page 127, I write in the margin, "This book feels like a collection of short fairy tales, held together by a razor-thin plot. Not very good. Nice, but forgettable." Then in chapter 14, we finally seem to be getting a real story. It's like in the first book, when halfway something occurs and the reader gets the feeling, well, okay, everything is going to go forward now. At the end of the book, in chapter 20, a series of seemingly random happenings tie all that happened before together in a rather haphazard way. This author's way of telling a story is peculiar, to say the least. Overall, the best I can say about this book is that it is nice. Obviously, the reading style rubs the wrong way with me. With 71 points out of 100, this was my least favorite read of the past 2 months. I will read the final book in the series, Hours of Many Ways, although I am not particularly looking forward to it. After that, I will make a video on the trilogy as a whole. Unless the final book surprises me in a good way, I'm afraid I won't be reading anything else by this author. The Crown Tower by Michael J. Sullivan, 377 pages, read between 18 and 22 May. Immediately after starting this read, I felt a big relief after the Dragonbone chair. Good, well cared for prose that is subservient to the story. And that story urged me through the pages. This book is divided into 2 major storylines that converge near the end. One is the story of how Royce and Hadrian meet and go on a dangerous mission ordered by Arcadius, a wizard and scholar whose motives remain a bit mysterious. The other story is about Gwen, a beautiful and intelligent young woman who tries to create a better life for herself and a couple of other young women. There is mystery, hardship, and political intrigue, and above all, there is the banter between our main protagonists, Royce and Hadrian. Both men don't get along at all in the beginning. Great character work. The deeper difference between Royce and Hadrian, for instance, is shown in a typical Sullivan way when both men are on the run and find a farm. Hadrian paused to knock. Royce walked in. "Don't move, or you'll die," Royce said. Hadrian followed him in. "Sorry about the intrusion." Subtle but unmistakably clear. All of it is told in prose that is more than just functional and beautiful at times. I can enjoy lines like, "Overhead, an unbalanced chevron of geese crossed the blue sky, honking." The author has really made an effort to make the reader at ease and relax while enjoying the story, which makes this book an easy read, not to be confused with simple. Sullivan is a master at dialogue. I won't show quotes right now because I intend to make a separate video on the first 2 books in the Riyria Chronicles. There, I will give plenty of examples of dialogues and other quote-worthy stuff. With 92 points out of 100, The Crown Tower is a fun read with convincing characters and an intriguing story. What more could I want other than more of this? The Rose and the Thorn by Michael J. Sullivan. 347 pages, read between 7 and 10 June. This second book in the Riyria Chronicles continues where book 1 ended, and I can say the same things about this one as I did on the Crown Tower. Michael J. Sullivan has such a smooth pen. The words roll in their intended order, which makes his books so nice to read. Reading this makes me wonder why so many fantasy authors choose to write 50, 100 or even more pages of fog and slog, when you can also start with a story straight away. The introduction of Albert Winslow, who we know from the Riyria Revelations, is great to read. Still, the story in this book progresses quite a bit slower than in the first book, but the prose is equally compelling. She spoke with perfect diction, which gave a hard edge to her words, as if she were biting celery. All in all, The Rose and the Thorn is a strong book. A good story, well told with beautiful scenes, and a bit slow at times, which is why I rated this one 91 points out of 100, only 1 point lower than its predecessor. Admirable dialogue and character work. Michael J. Sullivan keeps rising in my esteem. The Masked Rider by Neil Peart, 298 pages, read between 18 April and 30 May. This is the only non-fiction book I read these months. It's from an author I greatly admire and who many people will mainly know because of his work as the drummer of the Canadian rock band Rush. In this book, Peart describes his bicycle trip he undertook in November of 1988 through the land of Cameroon in the western part of Africa. I took my time with it because after 1 or 2 chapters each time I had to take a break from this extremely discomfortable journey. Heat, dust, hostile people, dirty lodgings, uncertainty about reaching destinations, dangerous situations with military people, etc. One wonders why the writer went on such a bike trip in the first place. What pulled me through is his masterful writing style, his observational skills and his philosophical approach to many situations, like right off the bat in the introduction. Travel is its own reward, but traveling among strangers can show you as much about yourself as it does about them. With their guide, David, a group of about 7 or 8 people cycle through the harsh environment of southern Cameroon. Later on in the story, they take a bus ride to the north of Cameroon, where they do another cycling trip. Peart's report on their travels is educational as well as unsettling. About a meeting with a local leader, he shook hands with us in the two-handed way, left hand supporting his own right wrist in an especially nice gesture, which symbolized that his hand was so heavy with respect that it took two hands to hold it up. I really like this kind of reverent symbolism. Reminds me of how people in Turkey clink their glasses when drinking a beverage. Clinking below the brim of the other one's glass indicates respect. The other stands higher than you. Around the 100-page mark it says, "My brother, Danny, feels that the greatest sadness in life is to lose a beloved mate, but he has no children. It seems to me that the deepest, most cruel sorrow must be a mother losing her child. No bonds can be tighter or more painfully broken." These words he wrote 9 years before his only daughter, Selina, dies in a car accident. Half a year later, his wife Jackie dies of grief. Neil is devastated and tries to accelerate the passing of time by riding his motorbike through Canada, Alaska, the USA and Mexico. Of these travels on what he called the Healing Road, he wrote his masterpiece, Ghost Rider. This book, The Masked Rider, is way less pungent and important. There are beautiful and profound observations, but most of it was boring, to be honest. It was nice to have read it, but it has certainly discouraged me to ever undertake a bicycling trip through Cameroon. Not that I had any intentions of doing such a thing. Homeland by R.A. Salvatore, 343 pages, which I read between 22 and 29 May. Exile, also by R.A. Salvatore, also 343 pages, which I read between 29 May and 2 June. Sojourn by R.A. Salvatore, 346 pages, which I read between 4 and 7 June. These three books together make the Dark Elf trilogy, the first series of the huge Legend of Drizzt saga. R.A. Salvatore had written and published the Icewind Dale trilogy earlier, but that story chronologically takes place after the Dark Elf trilogy. If you like to hear me talk in length about these three books, check out my dedicated review over here. The fact that I read all three books in little over 2 weeks' time tells you how much I enjoyed them. We follow Drizzt Do-Urden, or Drizzt Do-Urden, a dark elf who is born into the harsh and extremely violent Drow society in the subterranean city of Menzoberranzan. From early on, Drizzt's moral compass sets him apart from his ruthless kin. After some overkill in names at the beginning, the books read easily and fast. Even though politics and hunger for power are not my favorite themes, I really had a good time. My favorite pieces were the small prologues to each new part in the book, coming from Drizzt's memoirs apparently. They are philosophical and touch some deeper ground than the rest of the books. We all are prisoners at one time or another in our lives, prisoners to ourselves or to the expectations of those around us. The prose is functional and nondescript, devoid of flowery or poetry. Still, the books have a very high pickup ability of 90%. No doubt because the story is interesting and they are so easy to read. The second book, Exile, is clearly the lesser of the three to me. As the title suggests, Drizzt has been exiled from his home city of Menzoberranzan. In the perilous Underdark, he tries to evade the vengeful pursuit of those who view his departure as betrayal. He also has to survive the many monsters that threaten him. In his pursuit of a place for himself, Drizzt struggles with inner conflict and loneliness. Some sequences within this book strongly feel like filler material, which needlessly slows down the story. Another fighting sequence with a monster or a detour without any consequences for the story. The best part of Exile is the growing friendship between Drizzt and Belwar. Even though I enjoyed the coming of age in the first book the best, the third, Sojourn, is the most elaborate and interesting story of the three. Drizzt tries to find a home on the surface, which turns out to be extremely difficult for many reasons. Away from the Underdark, he is seeking to live a life of honor and virtue. I enjoyed the sequence with Montolio, Mouchi de Bruchy, the most. With this blind ranger who becomes a mentor to Drizzt, our main protagonist finally finds some sort of acceptance, and with that, some peace. Of course, we are treated to many fights and a big serious battle. Also, religion is explored more elaborately in this book, a theme that always has my particular interest, even though I myself am not a religious person. I rated Homeland with 84 points out of 100. Overall, a very enjoyable story, excellently told, albeit rather predictable. Exile got 79 points out of 100, a lower score because the story simply was less interesting. I gave Sojourn 82 points out of 100. The story is obviously working towards a seamless fit with the next trilogy, Icewind Dale, which was written first. Clearly, this trilogy is not without flaws, but what stays with me most is the pleasant and easy reading days it gave me. Even though the prose is functional and nondescript as mentioned, they have a high pickup ability. Definitely a series I can recommend to anyone. The Return of the King by J.R.R. Tolkien on audio. 298 pages in my edition, listened to from April 11 to 17 June. I started listening to the final book in The Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien on April 11th. Normally I make notes and underlinings in the book I'm reading. These are my guide when making my reading experiences. Because I cannot do that when I'm listening to audio, I don't have very much to say about it, other than that I liked it very much, and that it was very good to return to Middle-earth. I gave it 92 points out of 100. This book, to me, is the best of the three. The Shadow of What Was Lost by James Islington. 693 pages, read between 16 and 28 of June. This was a buddy read I did with BJ Minton, our 8th. As always, BJ took off like crazy at the beginning, but soon I was able to catch up with him. Not surprising, knowing that he reads about 8 books simultaneously, and I could concentrate on this one book. Still, I needed almost 2 weeks to finish this. I will be making a reading experience on this book as soon as BJ has finished and has shared his final thoughts on the book with me. Therefore, I will keep this short impression brief. This is a great epic fantasy novel, immersed in the traditions of The Lord of the Rings and The Wheel of Time. In fact, some of the concepts around magic, like the essence, the tenets, and the vessels, have strong Wheel of Time vibes. And some scenes seem to come straight from Middle-earth. To me, that was no problem at all. Islington has clearly created his own world, and the story is less straightforward good versus evil. In fact, with most of the characters, this division remains unclear, and many of them who seem to be good turn out to be bad later on in the story. It's like BJ observed. I feel like a ping-pong ball, watching the story bounce around with good guys who are really bad guys. This is the kind of fantasy I like best, with a mystery, a chosen one, the university trope, and so on. And nowhere does the story slow down to a drag. The reader is constantly kept busy with reveals, strange happenings, and interesting developments. The prose is excellent, although not very flowery or poetic. For me, there could have been a little bit more banter and humour. Things are and remain very serious. Another minor annoyance were the many similar names that got confusing. Tenric, Teris, Talion, Talcamar, Thorin. In that respect, the author didn't make it easy for his readers. The reveals in the epilogue came as a complete surprise to me. I gave The Shadow of What Was Lost 91 points out of 100. James Islington is a natural storyteller with a very rich imagination and a smooth and well-crafted pen. Occasionally, the clunky story twists and the multitude of characters with their hidden motives got me confused, but never for a long time. The main thread of the story remains visible at all times. Even though I try to stay away from chunky books these days, I simply have to continue reading this series. I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Harpman, 188 pages, read between 28th of June and the 1st of July. The final book I read for this episode of Treasures of Reading was a gift from B.J. Minton. Even though this book has a dystopian and science fiction feel to it, I would classify it as literary fiction. The story is about this group of women who live in an underground bunker in a cage. They are guarded and have no contact with the outside world. They don't know how they got there or why they are being held. The narrator is the youngest of the group, who remains nameless and is only referred to as Girl or the Girl. I may make a separate video in which I will go into more detail of why this is such a special book. For now, I can say that the story is very intriguing because you want to find out what's going on. The memoirs of the girl are introspective in a provocative way, which makes the reader think about the meaning of life and questions about nature versus nurture. It strongly reminded me of Beckett's Waiting for Godot and Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. There are many heartbreaking scenes, and the anticipation of possible answers that lie behind the next hill or the next kept me on the edge of my seat. I gave this book 92 points out of 100. This is a book that will be on my mind for quite some time. So, these were the 13 books I read in May and June. Have you read any of them, or did you read other books? I'd love to hear about your reading experiences. My average rating for these 2 months of reading is 82.54 points out of 100, even better than my last Treasures of Reading. This compares to 4 stars in the upper regions, which of course is a great score. Even though I cannot report on a 5-star read this time, these truly are the Treasures of Reading. Thank you very much for watching this video. Until we meet again at Dutch Greybeard.